Hello Year 11, welcome to another GCSE English Language Paper 1 revision session, and in this session we're going to focus on question 3. Now we're going to continue using the same insert as we used in the question 2 session. That's the insert A Sound of Thunder by Ray Bradbury, and I've re-included the two links to the insert and the question paper on these slides. Now hopefully you've already got that insert and question paper to hand from our last session, but if you haven't, then do pause at this point so that you can stop, you can read that insert. Remember, you've got 15 minutes to do so, and then you can start this PowerPoint again. So question 3 will ask you to focus on the whole of the extract. Remember, question 2 asks you just to focus on a section, as does question 1, but question 3 will then ask you to look at the whole of the extract. And this question is all about close text analysis again, but this time focusing on the structure of the text. Just like question 2, you've got 10 minutes to answer this question. Now, if you've got 25% extra time, remember you can give yourself 12 minutes for this. And just as in the last revision PowerPoint, remember it's up to you to manage your time wisely. So you need to make sure you're keeping a close eye on the clock or on your watch so you know how much time you are using in each question. So question 3 is our structure question. When we talk about the structure of a text, we mean the way in which the ideas are put together, the construction of the text. Structure is largely about the order in which ideas are given to us and the ways in which ideas develop from start to finish. So we're thinking about the building blocks of the text here, the way in which ideas are pieced together, the order in which we find out information, and the way in which ideas develop or change from beginning to end. Let's have a look at the question that we've got here. You now need to think about the whole of the source. This text is from the middle of a short story. How has the writer structured the text to interest you as a reader? You could write about what the writer focuses your attention on at the beginning of the source, how and why the writer changes this focus as the source develops, and any other structural features that interest you. Just like question 2, this is an 8-mark question. The wording of this question is pretty identical from paper to paper. The thing that might change is where in the text our insert comes from. So in the story that we're looking at today, it comes from the middle of a short story, and that's important to know because it might alter our expectations based on what we know of typical structures of stories. The bullet points for this question are especially handy. It says you could write about these 3 things. In actual fact, we must write about these things. We need to start by thinking about the beginning of the source and what our attention is focused on. And then that second bullet point, how and why this changes as the source develops. So we can then think about the middle of the source, and then we can think about the end of the source. So unlike question 2, where we might only write 2 paragraphs, we're really aiming for 3 paragraphs in this question. Something about the beginning of the extract, something about how that develops through to the middle, and then something about how the extract ends. So we're definitely looking for 3 paragraphs for this question. And of course, those paragraphs might be a little bit shorter than our paragraphs for question 2, simply because we've got to squeeze 3 in 10 or 12 minutes. So if we think about what an examiner is looking for, this is the same assessment objective as question 2. So very, very similar skills here. So the first thing, can you explain, comment on and analyse how writers use structure? So that's the significant change from question 2. Can you explain, comment on and analyse how writers achieve effects and influence readers? And lastly, can you use relevant subject terminology to support your views? Now, it's really important that we are very clear on the difference between language and structure for questions 2 and 3. You will not be awarded marks if you talk about structure in question 2, and you will not be awarded marks if you talk about language in question 3. We have to treat them as separate elements for questions 2 and 3. So when we think about the elements of structure, there are lots of different things that we might look at. We might start by thinking about Freytags' pyramid. Now, this is a structure that lots of stories typically follow. A lot of stories, a lot of television programs, a lot of films will follow this 5-part structure. We start with an exposition. We are exposed to the setting. We might meet the key characters. We discover where the action is taking place. We learn a little bit about the background information that we need to understand. And then some sort of complication might happen to lead to rising action. So this means that the plot starts to develop in terms of tension. There might be a problem that starts to unravel. It might be that a character goes on a journey. It might be that a change starts to take place. But the tension, the events, the pace starts to pick up until we reach the climax, the heightened moment of tension. That could be a fight, that could be a discovery, could be a realization. But there's something that happens that's the most important, the peak moment within the plot. And from there, we are then led on to falling action. Things start to calm down. Pieces of the puzzle start to fit together. We might start to get answers to questions that we had. We might start to learn secrets that have been kept from us. But things start to fall into place so that by the end, we have the denouement, the resolution. Now, that's not necessarily a happy ending, but it is an ending. Everything is tied together. We don't have a cliffhanger. We know the ending, the problem has been solved, or the answer has been given, and everything is wrapped up neatly. Not necessarily happily, but neatly. And this is our typical structure that lots and lots of stories will follow. Now, sometimes stories won't follow this structure, and it's then up to us to explore why that might be. So it might be that we're given an extract that seems to go against our expectations. And so we might want to think about why that is. Maybe we're given the beginning of a story, but actually it seems that we're at the end. And so we can be thinking about why that might be. Of course, there are other structural devices that we might also want to consider beyond the pyramid of ideas. We might again think about development of plot in different ways that it's presented. So we've got the linear, the chronological plot, beginning, middle, end, so kind of linking into that Freytags pyramid. We might, however, have some sort of cyclical structure, and this is where the author will start and end in the same place. Now, that could be the same physical location. It could be that they start and end with a character in the same situation. It could be that the same words or the same sentence or the same paragraph starts and ends the extract or the story. But it's a sense of coming full circle, being back to where you started from at the end. Of course, writers could also employ flashbacks or flash forwards. So there might be a sense of jumping backwards in time or jumping forwards in time. And again, it's up to us to unpick why that is necessary. It might be that we're given an extract that has a cliffhanger ending. And so we might be wanting to think about why that is. Why don't things end neatly? Why are we left with questions? And in terms of development of plot, we can also think about the paragraphs that are used, the lengths of paragraphs. Sometimes a short paragraph helps build tension. We can be thinking about the reason in which paragraphs are constructed in the way that they are. So we're thinking about development of plot, but there are other elements of structure that we could also be looking out for. A key aspect is the use of contrasts in a text. So it might be that the writer uses a contrast of light and dark. They might contrast something very loud with something very quiet. It might be that we have a contrast of night and day, the outside versus the inside. We might have a very deserted place and suddenly find ourselves in a very crowded place. Of course, these are just a few examples. You get the picture, but then we could be looking out for contrasts and differences between two things. So that sense of juxtaposing settings or ideas or environments or atmospheres. And lastly, we might be looking out for repetition. It might be that there's a key word or a key phrase that keeps getting repeated throughout the text. It might be that there's some sort of image that's repeated several times. Maybe there's a red glove that keeps cropping up time and time again. Maybe it's an image of the sea. It might be an image of the clouds, but there might be some sort of image that the writer keeps coming back to. Whether that slightly changes each time, so we might go from a cloudless sky to then white fluffy clouds to then storm clouds and then back to a cloudless day. Or it might be that that is a constant throughout. It could also be repetition of an idea or a feeling or a thought, but we want to keep an eye out for anything that's repeated throughout. And of course, all of these techniques are not only really helpful for our analysis of question 3, but they can also be really helpful things to consider when it comes to question 5 and the construction of our own writing, whether we're thinking about descriptive or narrative texts. So it's really important that we take a lot of time to familiarise ourselves with how writers structure their texts, because there are 2 questions on this paper that will be really focused on structure, both for analysis and for writing. Let's just remind ourselves of the question that we're looking at today then. You now need to think about the whole of the source. This text is from the middle of a short story. How has the writer structured the text to interest you as a reader? You could write about what the writer focuses your attention on at the beginning of the source, how and why the writer changes this focus as the source develops, and any other structural features that interest you. Now, it might be that you're given a text that doesn't hugely interest you in the exam. Now, of course, the exam board are going to do everything in their power to choose a text that they think will interest you. But if you find that you're faced with a text that actually you don't find particularly interesting, it just gives you an extra layer of challenge. You have to put yourselves in the shoes of somebody who loves reading, finds something really interesting in every text that they experience, and you have to try and think, well, what would somebody else possibly find interesting? And you have to try and pretend that actually you are interested. But as I say, the exam board will do their very best to try and find a text that will interest every single student sitting this exam. So just as with question 2, it's really important that we spend a couple of minutes planning our ideas before we write our response. Now we know that we're looking at the beginning, the middle and the end of the text as a starting point here. So what it might be helpful to do is jot down in 3 columns what happens at the beginning, the middle and the end. So for example, in the beginning, in this extract, we've got lots of scene setting. We've got the jungle, we've got the creatures, and then we go to the middle of the text and the Tyrannosaurus Rex appears. Eccles realises how much he underestimated things. which leads us to the end where Eccles starts to panic, he starts to run away, the dinosaur is shot and falls to the ground. So we want to take a little bit of time just to recap what happens at each stage of the extract. So it's really important that we think about these events as we go through the text from start to finish. Once we're happy with the content of what goes on at the beginning, the middle and the end, we can then start to think about what we notice in terms of the devices that the writer uses to shape these ideas. So for example, at the beginning, there's a real feeling of exposition, in spite of this actually being the middle of the story. Now, actually, in this case, that seems really appropriate because these characters have just arrived at the jungle. It's a new setting, and so it is appropriate to have a kind of reframing of the exposition. So we need some scene setting to reflect the fact that we're in a new place. We might also look at the fact that there are lots of short paragraphs, which creates a sense of tension as the characters look around this new setting and start to find their feet. In the middle, what we might notice is that the dialogue stops when they see the dinosaur. So throughout the extract, there's lots of dialogue, there's lots of talking, lots of speech. But when the Tyrannosaurus Rex comes along and they see this dinosaur, the dialogue stops and we just get the description from the writer, possibly as if the characters are completely in awe of this sight that they are witnessing. And then we return to very short paragraphs. So as the dinosaur has appeared, the tension builds even more than we saw at the beginning of the extract. And then towards the end, the dialogue stops again for a little bit. So we've got this kind of change in when we see dialogue, when we don't see dialogue within the extract, which is important for us to pick out. We could see that the focus at the end returns to the Tyrannosaurus Rex. So the figure that they've come to hunt at the beginning is the figure that we end on. So there's almost a cyclical element there, that the whole extract focuses on the hunting and the shooting of this dinosaur. And we have a single sentence paragraph to close this extract. So it really brings our attention to the dinosaur, to the T-Rex, that was the primary reason for these men journeying back in time in the first place. So that dinosaur that was desired to be seen and hunted at the beginning of the extract is the sole focus by the end of the extract. So really focusing in on the importance of the Tyrannosaurus Rex. Now, when we write our answer for this question, just as with question 2, we can use the what, how, why structure. What, how, why is a really, really important structure, not just for English language, but for English literature, because it makes sure that we're looking at the concepts of a text and the ways in which these concepts are shaped. So for question 3, we would start by thinking about what the writer does. So for example, we might think about what does the writer open the extract with, or if we're into our second paragraph, what changes or what develops as the extract progresses, or if we're on our last paragraph, what does the writer close the extract with? And we want to be thinking about what makes this interesting. Remember, interest is a key word in this question. And of course, we need to keep thinking what evidence helps us understand the way the text is being constructed. So again, we need our quotations as our evidence. Probably more quotations for this question than question 2. Once we've explored what makes the text interesting, we have to think about how that happens. So how does the writer use different devices to help interest the reader? How do the structural features mirror the events of the story? So what is it about the techniques of structuring that are very similar to the actual plot lines of the story, because the two will go hand in hand. Structure and plot work together. They have to work together to keep us interested. And then lastly, why is it important that the reader is interested in this part of the story? Why might the structure help the reader better understand character or plot? Now, one of the pitfalls of this question is that lots of students, when they write their ideas thinking about why it interests us, lots of students will say, oh, it makes us want to read on, or it makes us want to find out more. And of course that's correct, because that's the job of a writer, to sell books, to write stories that interest us. But we want to look a little bit deeper than that. Why is this making us want to read on? Why do we need to want to find out what is happening? So we're always looking for a little bit more detail than just it makes the reader want to read on. That's not going to get us the marks. It's about thinking about why it makes us interested. Why do we want to read on? Why do we need to find out what happens next? Thinking about this question then, again, we're going to look at an example paragraph. So remember, our question is, how has the writer structured the text to interest you as a reader? The what here begins, despite this being the middle of a story, this extract begins with a sense of exposition. Bradbury describes the high and broad jungle and the sounds that can be heard. This instantly interests the reader as it sets the scene for us. So I've used some key terminology because I've talked about the exposition. I've got some quotations in there as my evidence, and I've explained that it interests the reader, but I've started to consider why it is interesting the reader. So I've not just said it interests us, I've said why it does that. From there, I can then start to think about how this exposition helps keep us interested. So, for example, it might seem unusual that there would be a feel of an exposition partway through a story. But given the characters in the story have stepped off a time machine into a new environment, it is essential to ensure we are interested in the new surroundings. So I've contextualised this sense of the exposition and why that makes it unusual. And because it makes it unusual, naturally that interests the reader. So I've developed my what, and I've started to explain how that now interests the reader. So the last thing that we need to consider is why it's important that we are interested. It is important the reader experiences the exposition alongside the characters at this point. It helps us understand the sense of awe Eccles and his fellow travellers would be feeling, which consequently means we are interested and invested in the story. So we've looked at what is interesting for us, but then we've linked that to the story and the characters themselves. So we're thinking about the investment that readers have. If we're invested in a character, we care about a character. We need to go along on this journey with them. So there we've got our basic level what, how, why paragraph for a structure response. Now we could upgrade this, we could make this even better through extending our how and our why. So again, we've got some extension in purple. So it starts off in the same way. Despite this being the middle of the story, this extract begins with a sense of exposition. Bradbury describes the high and broad jungle and the sounds that can be heard. This instantly interests the reader as it sets the scene for us. It might seem unusual that there would be a feel of an exposition partway through a story, but given the characters in the story have stepped off a time machine into a new environment, it is essential to ensure that we are interested in the new surroundings. This is further demonstrated through the use of short paragraphs, which creates a sense that the characters are so bowled over that they cannot form complex thoughts. So I've extended my analysis now by thinking about a second structural device that helps emphasize the point that I am making, which is this sense of kind of being overwhelmed by the new surroundings. It is important the reader experiences the overwhelming exposition, so I've added in that sense of overwhelming alongside the characters at this point. It helps us understand the sense of awe Eccles and his fellow travellers would be feeling, which consequently means we are interested and invested in the story, just as Eccles and his fellow travellers are interested and invested in the hunt. So now I've extended my why to look at how our experiences as readers mirror the experiences of the characters. So I'm showing a connection between the reader's experience and the experience of the characters within the story itself. So that's what allows for that extra level of interest. So that's how I might upgrade my answer to make it that little bit more sophisticated and to gain myself a little bit of a better chance of moving into the next band of the mark scheme. Just as we did for our question 2 revision session then, I'm going to ask you now to have a go at writing your own paragraph in response to this question. So I've already done a paragraph on the beginning of this extract. So what I'd like you to do now is have a go at writing a paragraph either about the middle or the end of the extract. So really focusing on the development of ideas from the beginning to the middle or to the end. So again, we've got a reminder of those what, how, why prompts on the slide. What does the writer focus our attention on? So for this paragraph that you're writing, you're starting with that second question. So either what changes or develops as the extract progresses, or what does the writer close the extract with? Because I've already done that first one for us. And again, you want to be thinking about what makes this interesting and what evidence helps us understand the way the text is being constructed. Then you can go on to think about how these different devices help interest us and how the structural features might mirror, might echo the events in the story. And then lastly, in your paragraph, you want to think about why it's important that the reader is interested in this part of the story. Why might the structure help the reader better understand the character and the plot? So again, I'm going to start the timer, and when that circle is completely purple, your 5 minutes are up. So take your time, use those prompts on this slide, and you've got 5 minutes now to have a go at writing your own paragraph. Off you go. Okay, that's your 5 minutes up. So if you want to finish the sentence that you are writing, and then just as with question 2, we're going to look at how you can review your own paragraph. So again, on this slide, we've now got some things that make a really successful answer and things that we might want to set ourselves as targets when we write another paragraph. So things that make a really successful answer. I have explained how the writer develops the text from the beginning to the end, e.g. through considering contrasts or consistencies such as repetition. I've considered why the development of ideas is interesting. I've supported my ideas with evidence from the text. I've identified structural devices the writer uses, and I've explained what makes the structural devices interesting. I've explored how the writer uses structural features to mirror the plot. I've suggested why the reader needs to be interested at this point, and I've considered why the structure helps the reader understand character or plot. So these are all things that make a successful paragraph. So you might find it helpful to just pause this slide so you can spend time looking through all of those things and see how many of those you can apply to your paragraph. Then when you've looked at all the things that you've done really, really well, you can have a look at the box on the right-hand side and see what you think would apply to you to make your writing even better. So are there any things from the strength box that you haven't done? So you can then look for its pair in the EBW box so you can see what you need to do next time you have a go at writing a response to a question 3. And again, I've included links to another practice paper. So if you would like to, you can have a go at writing a new response to a different question. Now these are the same links as we used for question 2. So it should already be a familiar extract if you've already had a go at additional practice for question 2. So it's all the same question paper and insert and mark scheme, but this time you would be looking for question 3. And remember, if you've got any questions about this response, this PowerPoint, just ask, do get in touch. And again, if you've got a practice paragraph that you want to send to your teacher for feedback, of course, do so. Thank you very much for your time listening to today's revision PowerPoint.